when I was driving in this morning and the police about a block away from this convention center told me you can't get any closer, and I was walking past the very interesting demonstrations outside, one thought came into my mind. How did we get here? How did we get here? And I wasn't talking about the demonstration. I wasn't even thinking about the police force. I wasn't even thinking about how 13,000 of Israel's greatest advocates in the United States were giving up their Sunday to come to the AIPAC National Policy Conference. What I was thinking about was, how did we get to this point where there's an actual panel at the AIPAC Policy Conference on what the United States can learn from Israel's economy? How did this happen? And it dawns on me that you can think about the progression of Israel's economy and encapsulate it in two jokes. One that was a little popular in the beginning of the 90s and one that gained traction in the last year or two. And I'll share them with you very briefly. The first one talks about in the early 90s how an Israeli farmer met an American counterpart at an international agriculture conference. And, they're sharing their different experiences. And the U.S. farmer from Texas tells the Israeli, my typical day is I get in the car and I get in my truck in the morning and I drive. And I drive and I drive and I drive. And I stop for lunch and I have a big steak. And then I get back in my truck and I drive some more. And by the time the sun sets, I still haven't left my ranch. And the Israeli turns to him and goes, I used to have a car like that. Fast forward a couple decades. An Israeli and a Greek archaeologist are arguing over which country has a richer heritage. So the Greek archaeologist goes, a couple months ago, I was at an excavation. We dug 10 meters underground, and I discovered glass shards. Glass shards. So I spoke to our political experts and other members of my parliament, and we came to the indisputable conclusion that the ancient Greek telecommunication systems were based on fiber optics. Glass, glass shards. So the Israeli goes, that's nothing. A couple weeks ago, I was at an excavation. We went 10 meters underground. There was nothing. So I said, you know what? I'm going to be careful. Went another 5 meters. Nothing. I told my crew, another 5 meters. Nothing. He says, I spoke to our members of Knesset, our experts. We came to the irrefutable conclusion that the ancient Israeli telecommunication system was wireless. Now, how do we get from self-deprecating jokes about our cars to presumptuous jokes about our telecommunication system? Stephen, you spoke about the resiliency of Israel's economy. And, prior to joining the diplomatic corps, I was in the private sector, management consulting, private equity. When you make an investment, and it doesn't matter if it's venture capital, later stage private equity, publicly traded equities, what you look at more than anything else, and of course you have to look at all the ratios and all the numbers, but what you look at more than anything else is the people. And when you look to invest in Israel, what you're really investing in is the Israeli people. And when you think about how do we get from there to here, you really have to think about how the Israeli people have been able to develop a culture, not only of sophistication, but of entrepreneurialism. And when you talk about startup nation, it's easy to think about the entrepreneurialism and the ingenuity coming from the technology sector. But it really permeates all sectors. And I'll illustrate that with another couple of very specific anecdotal examples. I have, thank God, 5 children. And one of the things my kids enjoy very much is pizza. Now, this might surprise some of you, although I'm sure it won't surprise all of you, that not all my kids like the same kind of pizza. Each one has his or her own preferences. Now, up until 4 months ago, I lived in Israel. When I would go to my local pizzeria, I would go to the guy behind the pizzeria counter, and I'd say, listen, I need 1 tomato, 1 onion, 1 mushroom, 2 corn, 2 regular, and 2 without cheese. The guy behind the counter invariably would say, no problem. He might not have gotten an order like that all week. No problem. 12 minutes later, cut 8 ways, I've got my pizza. Every kid has a slice he wants. 4 months ago, I moved with my family to suburban Maryland to take up this posting. I went to the local pizza shop first Sunday. I said, man, Sunday pizza. Highly regarded pizza shop. I won't say which, but it's best in the Washington, D.C. area. I went to the guy behind the counter. I knew my order cold already. I said, 1 onion, 1 corn, 2 mushroom, 2 tomato, 2 regular, and 2 without cheese. Guy looked at me. I could have been talking Chinese. He said, there's no way I can do that. I said, what do you mean there's no way you can do that? He said, there's no way I can do that. I said, you got tomato, you got cheese, you got all the things. What's wrong? Can't do it. We do half one way, half the other way. That's it. You can pick any 2 ways you want, though. You have half this. Why? That's policy. My point is that entrepreneurialism and innovation is not the sole purview of the high-tech elite in the Tel Aviv-Herzliya-Ra'anana corridor. And I want to give you another example which demonstrates a little differently how Israeli chutzpah can actually be quite effective. Those of you that read Startup Nation are familiar, and many of you are probably familiar anyway, with a company called Netafim. Netafim is a drip irrigation company which has developed a world-class approach to more efficiently using water for agricultural purposes. How did the idea for Netafim come to the fore? Where did the inspiration come from? This kibbutz in southern Israel had hoses all over its fields, and there were leaks. So one of the guys, one of the management, told one of the workers, I want you to spend the afternoon going around, drive around on the tractor, and plug all the holes. We're wasting water. Makes sense. We're wasting water. Got to plug the holes. Guy drives around, and he sees where there's a hole, and there's a waste of water. There's foliage. And he sees where there's a bigger hole, and there's more water, there's more foliage. So what he does is, he doesn't plug the holes, he punches more holes in the holes. In essence, he did the exact opposite of what he was told to do. Now, it wasn't mentioned in the intro, before I went to Tnuva, I worked at McKinsey for 6 years in the US and Israel. And I spent a fair amount of time on the West Coast, had a lot of our clients are some of the leading companies really in the world, really innovative companies, world leaders. And a lot of people think, misguidedly, that the reason innovation is so great at companies like Google or Apple or others is because the employees are allowed to, take 20% of their time or, an afternoon a week or whatever it is and bounce tennis balls off the walls and think. That's not the secret. The secret is that these companies have cracked the code on creating a culture of innovation by letting their employees run with certain ideas with no risk of failure. And what do I mean by that? If they take a calculated risk and they have an idea and they run with it and it's thought through, even if it fails, they will not be reprimanded. They will not be punished because it was a calculated risk, and not all calculated risks succeed. Now, what that Israeli kibbutznik at Netafim, the reason he was able to be told to plug the holes and then go out and poke more holes, the exact opposite of what he was told, is because he knew that if he would go back to his boss and say, listen, I know you told me to do X. I did the exact opposite, but here's why. I went to the field, I saw this, I discovered this, and I reacted accordingly. He knew that he wasn't going to get in trouble. He knew that his boss would say, good idea, let's wait a couple days, and let's see what happens. Now, in a room with this many people, we've all had many life experiences, we've worked in different places, we know people. I suspect that everybody here knows people, present company excluded, of course, but knows people that would have plugged the holes. You're told to plug the hole, you're going to plug the hole. What we've been able to do in Israel is create an environment. You might be told to plug the holes, but you have to use your brain as well. And when you get out there and if you see that the order given from above does not necessarily make perfect sense given the new reality, you need to adjust. And if you know you're not going to get in trouble for thinking things through, you're going to create a culture of innovation and entrepreneurialism. I would only conclude by saying we talked about the people and we talked about what the U.S. can learn from Israel. I'm amazed at that title still. But I want to end with what I think, and Josh is going to follow me, Josh Cram, great representative for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I want to talk about not what Israel necessarily can learn from the U.S., but why I still feel very strongly and why I'm still bullish on the U.S. When I first took up this position, I actually was in D.C. a little bit before I took up the position. I came in for the IMF conference, and I had the opportunity there, along with the finance minister of Israel, Yuval Steinitz, to meet with a number of finance ministers from around Europe. And I came away from those meetings less than super enthusiastic about the hopes for Europe. Many, many European countries face real challenges on the economic front, and we should not be envious of them. But I also came away bullish on the U.S. Despite the challenges now, and everyone's talking about the difficult economy, and Josh's office, I don't know if any of you have seen it, it's right across the street from the White House. There's 4 big letters on it, JOBS. Their pure focus is how do we create more jobs for Americans, big issue of the day. And with all the challenges facing the United States now, the one thing they have, and this ties into the people, is if you think about the greatest minds around the world, the greatest graduate students and PhD and postdocs from Israel to India and all points in between, they still want to come to the United States. They want to come here for the education. They want to come here for the opportunities. And my message to the United States would be, as long as you can continue to nurture and cultivate a culture in which the greatest minds in the world want to come to the United States will be just fine. Its hegemony will be retained. I think that would be the best thing for the United States and would also be the best thing for Israel. Thank you very much.